Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for week 3 of Osteoporosis Canada's Summer Activities webinar series, Cycling, Hiking, and Soccer. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your webinar host. This month, we are hosting a Summer Activities webinar series focusing on different types of exercise and sports. Each 30-minute webinar will provide a review of what your exercise plan should include, and we will answer questions about the summer activities and sports featured. This week, we'll focus on cycling, hiking, and team sports like soccer. For those of you who have osteoporosis, you may need to make modifications or choose a different way to stay active entirely, depending on your condition. This webinar will provide general information. It is not intended as individualized health advice, and if you have questions, please consult your healthcare provider. Now, if you have a question or comment during the webinar, just click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, or you can enter your comments in the chat. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the time available. Osteoporosis Canada is the only national organization serving people living with osteoporosis. We work to educate, empower, and support individuals and communities on bone and muscle health and in the risk reduction and treatment of osteoporosis. We look to the best experts to inform our care guidelines for patients and care providers. Our Scientific Advisory Council is made up of experts from across the country in osteoporosis and bone metabolism and is a volunteer membership. We provide medically accurate information to patients, healthcare providers, and the public. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Dr. Caitlin McArthur. Dr. McArthur is an associate professor in the School of Physiotherapy at Dalhousie University and principal investigator of the 3F Research Group. She has completed a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, a Master's of Science in Physiotherapy, and a PhD in Kinesiology with a specialization in aging, health, and well-being. Dr. McArthur also completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Jarrah Center for Aging Research within the Department of Medicine at McMaster University. With a passion to improve mobility and quality of life of clinically complex older adults, Dr. McArthur is a lead instructor of the continuing education course BoneFit, hosted by Osteoporosis Canada, which teaches exercise professionals about safe movements, physical activity, and exercise for people with osteoporosis. Dr. McArthur is also an Inter-RAI Fellow. Welcome, Dr. McArthur.
Thank you. All right, I'm excited to be here for week number 3. Let me just get my slide sharing here for you, and then we'll dive right into cycling, hiking, and soccer. All right, so here's what we're going to be focusing on today. If you've joined us for the other webinars, it's a similar kind of format. So we'll talk about overall recommendations for exercise and physical activity, and then general safety tips that you want to be applying in your everyday life, but also when you think about leisure activities, how to apply those. Then we'll dive into some specific recommendations for cycling, hiking, and soccer. So just to kind of start us off, an important note, important thing to think about is some of these activities that we're going to be talking about today are risky and could have a high risk for fracture. And how you want to think about it is, if this is an activity you used to do frequently or you're already doing, we're giving you tips on how you may be able to continue to do it safely. But if this is something you've never done before, we're not suggesting this is something you start picking up unless you really, really want to, and then you really want to get some individualized advice about it. At any point, if you're uncertain, you should consult with somebody who has training and who can really give you some individualized, specific advice relative to your condition and how you are doing. So an example might be a physiotherapist who is bone fit trained, because they can really take your individual risk level and the risks and benefits of doing the activity and work on that with you. So, as was mentioned, BoneFit, if you want to know what it is, it's an exercise training workshop, and it's for health and fitness professionals to learn effective and appropriate exercises for people with osteoporosis. If you want to know who's BoneFit trained near you, we do actually have a locator map on the website. So, if you just go to bonefit.ca or call the 1-800 number there, you can find out who in your area is BoneFit trained that you could go see and get some individualized advice. All right, so today we're going to be talking about different types of movement. The main ones that we're focusing on with this webinar series are leisure activities. So these are things like sports, hiking, walking, biking, swimming, things that we kind of do for fun and pleasure, and the social aspect as well. And so that's kind of one piece of the pie of how we want to think about our movement. But then there's also other things like our daily activities, and this adds up to movement over time as well. Cleaning, if you're doing a big spring cleaning now that the weather's nice, things like doing laundry, doing dishes, vacuuming, gardening, again, mowing the lawn. Everyone was out mowing the lawn this week in my neighborhood. Getting in and out of bed or sitting or standing at work. These are all daily activities as well. So you want to think about safety relative to those two. And then the last piece, which is actually the first piece we're going to talk about today, because really it's the foundation, is your formal exercise plan. So this is, planned intentional exercise. So this is things like doing balance exercise, lifting weights, using weight machines or resistance bands, walking on the treadmill, or doing posture exercises where you sit down and think that this is what I'm going to work on during this particular exercise session. So let's, as I mentioned, this is actually the first thing we're going to talk about is that formal exercise plan. And why this is important is because this is kind of laying the foundation for you for then participating in those leisure activities. So you want to make sure that your exercise plan includes, this is the best evidence that we have to prevent fractures, is first and foremost balance and functional training that should be done 2 or more times per week. And these are exercises that challenge your balance. So this would be things like shifting your body weight, moving back and forth, side to side, those types of things. Reacting to things that upset your balance, so throwing or catching a ball. So leisure activities can actually be balance training as well, which is great. Maintaining your balance while moving. So this would be things like Tai Chi, or reducing your base of support. So things like standing on one foot or taking your hand off a counter to stand on one foot. Those all are things that challenge your balance. And while you're doing balance exercises, you should feel a little off balance. You should feel a little bit wobbly for them to actually challenge your balance. Not so much that you're going to fall while you're doing it, obviously, because we're trying to prevent falls, not cause them, but you do want to feel like you're working to maintain your balance. And then, so that's the balance training component. The functional training is things that improve everyday tasks or activities for fun or fitness. So these would be things like standing up from a chair or climbing stairs because they mimic everyday tasks. The other piece of your exercise, your kind of formal exercise plan, should be progressive resistance training, which again should be done 2 or more times per week. And with this, you want to target major muscle groups such as your legs and your arms. And you also want to target abdominal and back extensor exercises as well. Resistance exercises are anything that you work against resistance. So this could just be your own body weight, doing something like a squat or a push-up. It could be something like dumbbell. It could be weight machines, or it could even be exercise bands. So if you want, specific individualized advice about which exercises are best for you and where to start, that's where you want to work with somebody, an exercise professional, who can help you set up a program for this. So where do leisure activities fit in here? As I mentioned, some of leisure activities can actually challenge your balance, which is great, and they can help get at those pieces. But what's really important is we want to keep people active. We want to keep you doing the things that you like to do and, engaging in those social pieces as well. So leisure activities, if they can be done safely or they can be modified for safety, they can be part of that kind of exercise movement um, pie as well. The one thing that's really important to remember, though, is that these should be done in addition to, but not instead of, that formal exercise plan that includes balance, functional, and resistance training. So make sure that you still are doing that foundational piece that's going to set you up, and then participate in your leisure activities in addition to that. So from a safety perspective, what are the things we need to modify? So one thing that we really want to think about preventing with osteoporosis is spine fractures. So a lot of fractures happen from falls, but a lot of spine fractures happen from movements that we do every day. So spine movements that we want to think about limiting are things like forward bending, or we call flexion, or rotation, so twisting side to side. And we especially want to limit them if they are repeated or sustained, so you're doing them over and over, or holding them. If they're weighted, so you're holding something heavy while you're doing them. If they're end range, so you're going as far as you can forward, or rotating as far as you can side to side. Or they're rapid or forceful, so going as hard or fast as you can, or any combination of the above. And again, that's bending forward or slouching even, and rotation, twisting side to side, that we want to try to limit. So here's some general things that you can do building into your daily activities, but also thinking about how they apply to those leisure activities too. So the first one is called a hip hinge, where instead of bending forward through your spine, you're bending at your hips. So the hinge is happening at your hips rather than your spine. Stepping to turn rather than rotating through your spine. Avoiding lifting or lowering heavy things from the floor or from a high location like a tall cabinet. Going slow, controlled, twisting, not to the end range of motion. Splitting up loads on either side of the body, and this might be relevant to thinking about hiking, for example, when you think about your backpack. If it's a little bit heavier, making sure that you're splitting that load on either side, and supporting your trunk when you're flexing forward. So that might be putting your hand on a table or even on your own thigh. Then that helps support your trunk or your upper body while you're bending forward, and holding the weight close to your body and not overhead. So here's some examples of what that kind of looks like in daily life. So the first one is that hip hinge that I was talking about. So you can see in this image here, the person is bending at their hips, keeping their spine as upright, as straight as possible, rather than bending forward through their spine. And here's an example of how that applies to, for example, tying your shoes. Or here's another way you can tie your shoes, by putting it up on a stool. And these all apply to leisure activities because you got to put on shoes to go cycling or hiking or whatever it is. Picking objects up from the floor. So this could be picking up your backpack, picking up your bike helmet, picking up your pack, all of those types of things, picking up the soccer ball. So in general, with respect to leisure activities, these are the things that you want to think about. So oftentimes we forget about the transitions, and those are the little things that add up over time. So these are things like getting your shoes or gear on and off, picking up or loading your gear, picking things up off the ground, or getting in and out of risky positions, like forward bending or rotation. Then the actual movement, so the actual like cycling, the actual playing of soccer. Does it require spine sparing? Do we need to think about that? And can it be modified? Some things can, maybe some things can't. And then the other thing is the risk of falling. So, transitions in the movement, we're thinking more about that spine sparing, but the risk of falling could also be very real, and many fractures happen because of falls as well. So you want to think about, are there external supports that you could use? So let's get into our specific activities. So cycling or biking is the first one. So the first thing that could be potentially unsafe is sitting in a position while bent forward. So especially if you are, I'm going to say a hardcore cyclist, or an avid cyclist, where you're in that bent forward position for a long period of time. So that is sustained end range spinal flexion. That is a potentially unsafe movement and could increase your risk for spine fractures. So modifications to help with that are raising the handlebars so you're sitting more upright so that you're not in that forward bent position. Also setting a timer and taking posture breaks every 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. 20 minutes is just the number I chose. It's not a magic number, but just reminding yourself, okay, I've been in this position for a while. I'm going to sit up. I'm going to stretch up a little bit, and then returning to that position if you like. The other potentially unsafe thing associated with cycling is falling. So falling off a bike while you're cycling. I've treated people who have sustained hip fractures from falling off their bike. Even just, they didn't get in a bike accident. They were just stopped at a red light. They misplaced their foot. They fell over and sustained a hip fracture. So, the risk of falling is real. And we know that many fractures happen because of falls. So, the best modifications or suggestions I can make are things like ride on paths that are well paved, avoid uneven ground, or, this time of year potholes, be really aware of that, or unexpected environments where you're not sure, what's going to happen. Is there going to be a lot of kids that you might have to brake suddenly or turn rapidly or anything like that? Try to be in a fairly controlled environment that is well paved and the ground is okay. The other thing to think about is biking is not as much of a weight-bearing activity. And we know that that's weight-bearing component is important. So thinking about, can you combine biking with some of those other weight-bearing activities, like making sure you're doing that progressive resistance training, but could you also incorporate like a walking program, for example? So the next activity we're going to talk about is hiking or walking. So some potentially unsafe movements. The first one is losing balance or tripping is a potentially unsafe movement. And this, needs to be modified because it can definitely increase our risk of a fall. The second component is poor posture as you become tired. So especially if you're doing, for example, like a long hike or a long walk where you're going to get tired, we tend to get a little slouchy, a little rounded forward when we get tired. And if, for example, you're hiking and you're carrying a pack, and then you're also slouching, now you're weighted and you're in flexion. So you want to try to prevent that. We know that if you're in poor spinal alignment, it can actually increase your risk for falls, but it can also increase that spine compression and increase the risk for spine fracture. So walking poles are a great tool to help with this. They help provide an external support, just from the perspective of trying to prevent a fall while walking. So you've got that external support, a little bit extra support to decrease the risk for fall. As long as you know how to use the poles properly and you're not going to trip over them. And they also encourage, depending on which poles you use, the more stationary poles that you hold out in front of you, they encourage an upright posture throughout. So they encourage you to push down through them and lift your chest. And so they actually encourage you to be more upright while you're walking or hiking. So that can be really helpful as well. So that you don't get into that kind of poor posture as you become tired. The last one we're going to talk about is soccer. And really, I think this could apply to any kind of field or team sport. I don't know if anyone's playing rugby. That's definitely a lot more aggressive, but any sort of like team sport where you're running, like ultimate frisbee, those types of things. The potentially unsafe part is there's two, I would say. So colliding with a teammate or opponent, as well as falling, are probably the two most potentially unsafe things that could happen. As I mentioned in the beginning, soccer, I think of it as it could be quite a good balance challenge. And so in one way, it's, your balance training. But if that challenge is so high that you're going to fall or you're going to collide with somebody, that could increase your risk for fractures. So modifications for this, you can't necessarily change the sport. It is what it is. But similar to if you attended the racket sports, I was talking about competitiveness. So sometimes when we're like really competitive and we're really into a game, we do things that maybe we wouldn't have done if we weren't being so competitive. So, think about the league that you're in, think about your own mindset in the game, and try to decrease that competitiveness. Also practice no contact, letting, if you feel comfortable, letting your team know that you really want to avoid contact, or join a team that is no contact, whatever the sport is. And just also think about wearing that protective gear. So, shin guards are pretty standard in soccer, but also thinking about like a wrist guard might be helpful, from putting your hand out and falling on it and potentially breaking your wrist perspective. Okay, so to wrap up, we've talked about exercise as general. So you really want to make sure you've got that good foundational plan. So thinking about balance, functional, and resistance training, laying the foundation for what you're doing, and then practicing those spine sparing strategies throughout all of the movements that you do, formal exercise, daily activities, and then leisure sports. Then we went through those general safety tips, that you really want to apply to anything. But particularly to leisure activities, you want to think about the risk for falling, think about the actual movements involved in the sport that you're doing, and then transition. So even how are you going to put on your shoes, picking up your pack, making sure that you're loading that on safely as well, using that good hip hinge to bend forward and pick something up is going to be really, really important. All right, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I know there was some that had come in ahead of time.
Yes, Dr. McArthur, we do. We do have some questions. We've received a few questions around hiking and carrying a backpack. I think that could also apply for cycling. And some of the questions are about the weight and about the packing, but you did talk already about how to lift heavy weights, and what the benefits, the pros and cons of how to wear the pack so that it's safe. Can you speak to that?
For sure, yeah. So you don't want to load yourself up too heavy for either cycling or hiking. Cycling, especially, you're already sitting, which adds compression. And then if you haven't raised your handlebars, you're in that forward flex position already. And so then if you're also adding weight to that, you're really kind of adding up the compression to your spine pretty quickly. So make sure that you're sitting up, as upright as you can. Take those posture breaks, and then you don't want to load it too heavy. I don't have a magic number. I don't think the magic number exists, but nothing too heavy. Don't, bring an excessive amount of stuff with you if you don't need to. Maybe look into saddlebags if that's possible for your bike as well. And then you don't even have to consider a pack. For hiking, you're standing, so you've kind of alleviated compression a little bit there, but same thing, you don't want to load yourself too heavy. And if possible, you could also think about, is there a way to kind of equalize the load across your body so it's not just all on your back? So, some people wear like a front and a back, or if there's a way you can split things up with your partner if you're going, that would be great. I can't, again, give you a magic number, but you don't want to go super heavy. Pack fairly light so that you're not adding compression to your spine from your pack.
That's great. So we have a question around cycling. So if the individual is leaning forward, but their spine, their back is in that hip hinge position, is that okay, or does that still require the brakes?
I would still take breaks. It is quite hard to maintain that position for quite a long period of time. And if you're kind of bent, if you're bending forward, your back muscles have to t turn on to hold you upright against gravity. That's just how it works. And if you're not, able to maintain that like perfectly aligned, that your muscles can actually increase compression on your spine as well. So you still do want to take some breaks. Maybe you don't need to take them quite as often, but it's a good idea to get out of that position for a little while, because it's really hard to maintain that for a long period of time. And eventually you're going to get tired, and you'll end up in a slouchy position anyway. So it's a good idea to take breaks.
Okay, great. And still with the cycling, there's a lot of what they call weekend warriors. They're very serious cyclists. Does the type of bicycle make a difference? 1 with a crossbar, 1 maybe not.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's that is too much of a consideration, like crossbar versus not. I'd say I'd think about like your handlebar height. That's probably one of the biggest considerations because that will determine where your back is. So if you're in a slouched forward position versus more upright, that's probably the biggest thing. But then also thinking about your tires relative to your the surface you're going to be on. Um, if you have a nice wide tire, that's going to, decrease your risk of wobbliness and potentially falling, versus like if you were on like a road bike and you were then on a gravel path, that can be quite wobbly. A road bike on a road is okay, but think about like the width of the tire because that can decrease your wobbliness and then your risk for falls.
Okay, great. And we have a couple of questions around individuals who maybe haven't been as active over the last 10 to 20 years, and they're looking to get active again. One individual is wanting to start a run program. Could they, is it safe to start that learn to run? What about, joining a local soccer team, or starting to cycle if they haven't really been that active in the last few years?
Yeah, great question. So it's great, when people are interested in getting active, and we definitely want to encourage that. You want to make sure you've really got those foundational pieces down. So make sure you've got your progressive resistance training, your balance and functional training, and you're working through that. And then you can start adding those other pieces on. So, if you haven't exercised for a while, I wouldn't say like start with running, and don't just do running. Make sure you're doing those other pieces first, and then you can think about adding those on. And likewise with, for example, soccer. Like if you've just kind of been inactive for a while, for whatever reason, life happens and you want to get back into it, I'd make sure you've got that foundation down before you dive in. And that's where, consulting with somebody on an individualized basis can be quite helpful because they can help you get that set up and help you kind of determine when you might be ready or if you are ready to dive into some of those more leisure activities.
And we're going to move to kind of hiking and walking. Can you speak to the importance of really having the right type of equipment, like the right type of footwear? Walking in flip-flops, not a
Yeah.
great idea. We want to have proper fitting shoes, etc. That just kind of get you ahead of it, even before you start.
Definitely, yeah. So again, we come back to like what are the risks of falling because that's the biggest risk for fracture in addition to those kind of unsafe spine movements. But footwear can really increase your risk for falling. So you want to make sure you've got a good supportive shoe. It's got a closed back. It's got good grip. You're not going to be sliding around in it. That that can really help prevent some of those slips, some of those trips. If make sure they're well fitting, they're not too big, that you're going to be tripping over the toe. All of those kind of foundational pieces can be really, really helpful as well, from a fall prevention perspective.
And I have someone here so it's a different kind of sport. They're looking to increase density, but by jumping on a trampoline or a rebounder. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. So, the best evidence we have is relative to um, uh, resistance training. So that's what you want to really be spending your time on. There is some evidence related to impact training, but it's not something you want to, again, just dive into. You need to set the foundation, make sure that your body is ready to start doing that impact, and you're not going to increase your risk for other types of uh, as like strain type injuries with rebounding or impact or anything like that. It can be part of the plan, but again, you want to make sure you have that foundational progressive resistance training in place. It's also you have to think about other parts of the equation too, like if you're on an osteoporosis medication, what your nutrition looks like, and those types of things. Any other secondary conditions that you're living with that might affect your bone density, all kind of go into that equation. So it's one piece, but you got to look at that whole picture as well.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. It's actually about bone fit. So somebody has already gotten on the website and they've seen that the certification covers people who are everything from a physiotherapist to a personal trainer. And so they're asking, like, how should they choose who they work with? Does it matter as long as they're bone fit trained?
Yeah, so it does matter. People will have different levels of expertise and different experiences. So if you are somebody who's living with more complex conditions, you have multiple chronic conditions that you're managing, or if it's a bit more complex of a situation, then you want to seek out somebody like a physiotherapist. Or if you've had a fracture, you have pain, those types of things, a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist, kinesiologist, that you want somebody with expertise in that area. If you're looking to get advice about exercise, but you've been active, you haven't had any fractures, you're not living with a lot of other comorbidities or other conditions, then a personal trainer or someone like that might be a better fit. I'd say when in doubt, go, with a physiotherapist, and then they can help you navigate from there.
All right. Dr. McArthur, thank you very much. We are going to just wrap up here. So there we go. Gonna, well, sorry about that. It seems to be frozen on this slide. We're just going to let you know. There we go. All right. Sorry, a little technical glitch there. For more information, as always, please visit the website. This is being recorded and will be available on the OC Replay webpage, just like the other webinars. You can also find webinars on sarcopenia, which we've done, our cooking demos, which are also on the replay page. We encourage you to visit the Nutrient Calculator webpage. You can also download it onto your smartphone, and our podcasts. We have lots of podcasts, including The Function of Protein, which is really interesting with Dr. Susan Whiting. You can visit that on our website, but also where you listen to your favorite podcasts. Coming up, we have a webinar tomorrow. We've got a cooking demo with Emily Richards, turkey smash burgers with a green goddess spread, protein and other nutrients. We're going to show you how to make that. And next week is our final webinar in the series, and we're going to be speaking to water sports, again with Dr. Caitlin McArthur. There's still time to register for both of those webinars. Now, coming up in the next few months, we're just working on them now, webinars on GLP-1 medications and bone health, and also breast cancer and bone health. So be sure to check your email, website, etc., for details and how to register. Thank you as always to everyone. Make sure you subscribe to our communications, and we are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube Music. Take care. Have a great evening. Thanks again, Dr. McArthur, and we will see everyone hopefully again at our next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.